I never imagined that coming home after a short business trip would change the way I saw my family forever. I had been away for only 4 days. My old friend Daniel had invited me to help him settle some paperwork in another city. And since I had recently retired, I agreed before leaving. I made sure everything at home was in order. My house had been mine for nearly 30 years. I had built the garage myself with the help of 2 friends, one wooden beam at a time. It wasn't just a place to park my car. It held my tools, old photographs, my late wife's gardening supplies, and memories from every stage of my life. When I turned onto my street that afternoon, something immediately felt wrong. From a distance, my house looked different. At first, I thought I had taken the wrong road. The large oak tree was still there. The blue mailbox was still standing beside the driveway. But the garage, the solid brick garage that had been attached to my home for decades, was gone, completely gone. In its place was an enormous open space covered with fresh gravel. A new wooden fence had been built along one side, and several construction materials were stacked near the back of the property. I stopped my car in the middle of the street. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My first thought was that a storm had destroyed it, but there had been no major storm. Then I wondered whether the city had ordered it demolished. That made no sense either. No one had contacted me. I slowly pulled into the driveway and stepped out of my car. The air smelled of fresh wood and wet cement. I walked toward the empty space where my garage had stood. The foundation had been broken apart. My workbench was gone. The shelves were gone. Even the old red toolbox my wife had given me for our 20th anniversary had disappeared. Then I heard laughter coming from inside the house. The front door opened, and my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, stepped outside holding a glass of iced tea. "Oh," she said casually. "You're back already," I stared at her. "Where is my garage?" She took a sip from her glass and smiled. "We had it removed." "You had what?" "Removed the garage," she replied. "It was old and ugly. We're making better use of the space." For a moment I thought I had misunderstood her. "We, Mark and I." She said, "We've been planning some improvements." The garage was taking up too much room. My son Mark appeared behind her. He looked nervous, but he didn't say anything. I turned toward him. "Mark, what is she talking about?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Dad, we were going to explain. Vanessa wants to build a guest suite and a larger outdoor area. The garage didn't fit the design. You demolished my garage while I was away. It was just an old building." Vanessa interrupted. "You barely used it." I looked at the empty space again. She was wrong. I used that garage almost every day. I repaired furniture there. I stored family belongings there. I kept the last things my wife had touched before she passed away. But Vanessa didn't care. She walked closer and pointed toward the construction materials. "We're going to build something much nicer. You should be happy. The property value will increase." "My property," I said quietly. Her smile faded for half a second. "Yes," she replied. "But Mark will own it someday. We're thinking about the future." That sentence hurt more than I expected. My wife had died 6 years earlier. After that, Mark and Vanessa had moved into the house temporarily. They said they needed time to save money for their own place. I had agreed because Mark was my only son and I wanted to help. Temporary became 1 year. 1 year became 3, then 3 became 6. During that time, I paid the property taxes, the insurance, the repairs, and most of the household expenses. Mark contributed when he could, but Vanessa often talked about the house as if it already belonged to them. She changed the living room furniture without asking. She painted the kitchen cabinets. She turned my wife's old sewing room into a storage area. I tolerated all of it because I wanted peace. But demolishing my garage was different. "You had no right," I told her. Vanessa folded her arms. "Actually, we did. Mark is your son. This will be his house eventually." "No," I replied. "That doesn't give either of you permission to destroy my property." Mark stepped forward. "Dad, don't make this a big issue." The garage was falling apart. It was not falling apart. The contractor said it was unsafe. Vanessa added, "Which contractor?" She hesitated. I don't remember his name. Then show me the inspection report. Her confident expression disappeared. There wasn't an inspection. Mark admitted. I looked at him. So you hired people to demolish my garage without asking me, without an inspection and without my permission. We thought you'd understand. He said no. I replied, you hoped I wouldn't fight you. Vanessa rolled her eyes. You're overreacting. It's only a garage. I walked past them and entered the house. Everything inside suddenly felt unfamiliar. There were new decorations on the walls. My wife's photographs had been moved from the living room. The chair where I used to sit had been pushed into a corner. It was as if they had slowly erased me from my own home. That evening, I stayed quiet. Vanessa seemed pleased with herself. She talked about the new guest suite and showed Mark pictures on her phone. She described a modern outdoor kitchen, a small pool, and a private entrance. Then she said something that made my decision clear. When the construction is finished, we'll finally have enough space for our family. You can move into the smaller room upstairs. I looked at her. The smaller room. Yes, she said. It makes more sense. The master bedroom should belong to Mark and me. Mark looked uncomfortable, but he didn't defend me. That silence told me everything. I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and opened the small safe hidden behind an old painting. Inside were several documents: the house deed, the property records, my will, and a legal agreement I had signed years earlier after my wife died. I had met with an attorney because I wanted to make sure the house would eventually be handled fairly at the time. Mark was struggling financially, and I had considered transferring part of the property to him. But my attorney advised me not to make any changes while I was still living there. Instead, I created a trust. The trust stated that I would control the property for the rest of my life. After my death, the house would not automatically become Mark's. It would be sold. The money would be divided between several people and charities my wife and I had chosen together. Mark would receive a portion, but only if he respected the conditions listed in the trust. One condition was especially important. Any person who intentionally damaged the property, pressured me to leave, or attempted to take control of the house without permission could lose their inheritance. I had never expected that condition to matter. Now it mattered more than ever. The next morning I called my attorney. His name was Mr. Harris, and he had known my family for years. When I explained what happened, he was silent for several seconds. They demolished the garage? He asked. Yes. Did you give written permission? No. Did you give verbal permission? No. Then we need to document everything. He told me to take photographs of the property, save any messages related to the construction, and request copies of all contractor invoices. I did exactly that. Later that afternoon, Vanessa came home carrying shopping bags. She saw me taking pictures outside. What are you doing? Documenting the damage. She laughed. Damage? We improved the property. You destroyed a structure without the owner's consent. You're acting like we committed a crime. I don't know what you committed. I replied, that's why I'm speaking with an attorney. Her smile disappeared. You called a lawyer. Yes, you wouldn't do that to your own son. I didn't do this to my son. You did this to yourselves. She became angry. You're trying to control us with money. No, I said. I'm protecting what belongs to me. For the next 2 days, the atmosphere inside the house became unbearable. Vanessa complained that I was ruining the family. Mark begged me to forget the situation. Dad, we can rebuild the garage. He said you can't rebuild 30 years of memories. We didn't know you cared that much. You didn't ask. He lowered his head. That was the problem. They had never asked. They assumed that because I was older, my decisions no longer mattered. They believed the house was already theirs and that I would accept whatever they chose. But they were wrong. 3 days later, Mr. Harris arrived with a folder. We sat at the kitchen table. Mark and Vanessa joined us. Vanessa looked confident again, so she said, "Are we settling this?" Mr. Harris opened the folder. First, he explained the property is legally owned by Mr. Carter. No ownership. Interest has been transferred to his son or daughter-in-law. Vanessa's expression changed, but Mark is the heir not automatically. Mr. Harris replied. She looked at Mark. What does that mean? Mr. Harris removed another document. This property is protected through a trust. The trust contains conditions regarding inheritance. Vanessa's face became pale. What conditions? He read the section. Concerning property damage and attempts to force me from my home. The room became silent, then Vanessa laughed nervously. That can't be serious, it is legally binding. Mr. Harris said. Mark looked at me. Dad, you never told me about this. You never asked, I replied. Vanessa stood up. So you're threatening to leave us with nothing? No, I said. I'm telling you the truth. You should have understood from the beginning. She stared at me. And what truth is that? I placed my hand on the old wooden table. This house is not yours. It was never yours. And being my son's wife does not give you the right to decide what happens to my property. Her face turned red. But Mark will inherit it. No, I replied. Not if the conditions are violated. That was the truth she had never expected. For months, Vanessa had acted as if she owned the house. She believed she was planning her future home, but she had never checked the documents. She had never asked what my wife and I wanted. She had simply assumed, and now that assumption was falling apart. Mr. Harris explained that I could seek compensation for the demolished garage. I could also require the construction work to stop immediately. I looked at Mark. He was crying. I'm sorry, Dad. He said I should have stopped this. Yes, I replied. You should have for the first time. Vanessa had nothing to say. The construction stopped that afternoon. The contractors removed their equipment. The guest suite was canceled. The outdoor project disappeared, but the garage was still gone. No amount of money could bring back the old photographs, the workbench, or the tools that had belonged to my father. I decided that I would rebuild, not because Vanessa wanted a better property, not because Mark wanted an inheritance. I would rebuild because the garage was part of my life. Several weeks later, Mark came to me alone. He apologized again. This time he didn't make excuses. I let her convince me that the house was already ours. He admitted, I forgot that you were still here. His words were painful, but they were honest. I told him that trust could be repaired, but it would take time. As for Vanessa, she moved out for a while. She had believed that one day she would control everything. Instead, she learned that ownership is not something you inherit through assumptions. Respect comes first. Permission matters. And family does not mean taking whatever you want. A year later, a new garage stood beside my home. It was smaller than the old one, but stronger inside. I placed my rebuilt workbench, new shelves, and a framed photograph of my wife. Above the door I hung a small wooden sign. It reads, some things belong to you because you bought them. Others belong to you because you built them. Every morning I looked at that sign and remembered what happened. My daughter-in-law had smiled when she saw my garage disappear. She believed she had one, but the moment she learned the truth, that the house was never guaranteed to belong to her, that my son's inheritance had conditions, and that I still controlled my own future, her smile vanished in the end. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to shout. I only needed to remind them of one simple truth. A person may grow old, but that does not mean their voice, their home, or their choices belong to someone else.